Once you've made sure you've taken the time to clarify for your students what academic integrity actually is, then think about how your assessment planning either encourages or discourages academic honesty. First of all, make your course expectations reasonable. We know that in the distance learning environment, everything takes more time. Are you taking that into consideration when deciding on how many assessment tasks to give your students? If it's too much, they may have no option other than to cheat in order to be able to get it done. Consider how you talk about assessments. If you talk about assessments in a way that makes them seem very high stakes, like this is worth this huge percentage of your mark. If you don't do this, you are at risk of failing. Then you're putting such high stakes on the assessment, it's going to encourage some students to cheat just because it's so terrifying to think about what would happen if they weren't successful. On the other hand, if assessments are super low stakes, I've heard teachers say before, this is formative. It's never going in the grade book. It doesn't matter. It's just practice for you. Well, then students will realize if it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter if I just copy off of a classmate. So focus more on what students will learn out of engaging in that activity rather than how much it is going to or is not going to count in your grade book. Design tasks that build on prior work. If your assessment tasks are a one-off, then it's easier for students just to grab some work off the internet to pass off as their own. But if you're designing tasks that build on a student's prior work, where you know what they've done previously and what they're doing now has to be a continuation of that, that makes it really, really hard to plagiarize. Require students to make personal connections when answering questions in any subject area. By forcing them to make that personal connection, it makes it a lot harder to just Google up an answer. Similarly, including self-reflection or critical thinking components to each assessment also makes it nearly impossible to plagiarize. So always think about how am I asking students to reflect on the process they went through to complete this task, and how can that help ensure that it is their work alone. Ask about connections and concepts rather than simply asking students to recall facts. Those easily Googleable answers are really going to be the ones that lend well to cheating. And make process check-ins a required part of larger assignments. If all you're asking for is the final product, again, that's really easy to find in an essay mill. But if you are saying you have to hand in an annotated bibliography, an outline, a first draft, and so on, all those process pieces really discourage cheating. You could require that specific resources be used. For example, you have to use a newspaper from within the last week in your final product. They're unlikely to find something pre-prepared on the internet that has that included. Or you could say you have to use a local news source in your final product, because again, if they're getting their response from an essay mill, they're probably not going to find one that includes a local news source. Conference with students, ask them about their process, ask them about their thinking in what is in their final product, and have them defend their work. If they can confidently speak to what is in their final product, then you can be pretty well assured that it's their own work. On the other hand, if they're not really all that familiar with what they've included in that product, you might have some further questioning to do. Assign very specific questions that are not likely to be found in essay mills. A lot of the more classic novels that are used in an English class have multitudes of essays available online. So think about, if you're using those more common books, what questions are you asking about them? Or even better, use texts in your class that are a little more uncommon and may not have as many pre-prepared responses online. Give students adequate time to meet deadlines. Usually they resort to cheating when they're feeling under pressure to get something done and they don't feel like they can approach you for an extension. So be really open to asking students about how things are going with respect to their workload. Be flexible about setting deadlines together, and then make sure that you're not assigning something one day and expecting it the next. We're all feeling under really tight timelines in this quadmester model, but we need to think about the impact that rushing through things is having on student learning and their ability to take the time to do good work. If you're going to use tests in the distance learning environment, you should assume that they are always open book. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You can craft a good, deeper level of knowledge test by adapting your questions. But don't just make it a textbook scavenger hunt, because if you do that, your students are going to use their textbooks or Google and make it a scavenger hunt. So make sure if you're using online tests, you ask appropriate questions that still force your students to think. And in the interest of modeling proper academic integrity, I would like to thank Slides Carnival for the slide template and just let you know that the bulk of the information that you found or I've gone over in this slideshow comes from this article, Encouraging Academic Integrity Online, from the Center for Teaching Excellence at the University of Waterloo.